You know, there are certain places in the biblical story that just resonate with a power that goes far beyond their geographic coordinates.
Hmm,
They carry this weight, almost a symbolic destiny that helps define human limits, our ambition, and ultimately God's reach.
that's very true.
And today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into one of those exact locations, Tarshish.
It is a perfect example, Tarshish. It really lives in the biblical imagination as a place that's both, incredibly distant and also dazzling.
Dazzling, that's a good word for it.
It is. If you trace the references all the way across the Old Testament, the name itself just calls it this incredibly vivid imagery. You think of these huge ocean-going cargo ships,
Right.
hulls heavy with silver and tin. You think of mariners who had this advanced, almost mysterious understanding of deep-sea currents and winds.
So it's not just a port.
No, not at all. It is the destination for global commerce. It symbolizes the absolute maximum of human technological and economic reach at the time.
And that immediately sets a very high bar. We hear about the immense resources Tarshish supplied. I'm thinking of Ezekiel, where it's a key trading partner,
Yep.
or Jeremiah,
Yeah.
where the materials are linked to this incredible high-end craftsmanship.
Exactly.
So for this deep dive, it's pretty clear our mission is more than just trying to pin a location on an ancient map. What exactly are we hoping to uncover here?
Well, our purpose is really to move beyond the geography of it and to understand Tarshish's its persistent theological role across the entire Old Testament story.
Okay.
Because when we look at the narrative all the way from Genesis through the prophets, Tarshish consistently comes up as this test case for how God's authority and his sovereignty extend to the very ends of the earth.
So we're tracking a symbol.
In a way, yes, a symbol of human independence and wealth, and we're seeing how God interacts with it.
Let's just linger for a moment on that initial imagery because it is so evocative. When you talk about silver and tin and these specialized mariners, you're not describing a simple regional port. You're establishing a sense of an advanced, a highly organized civilization, a system built on immense resource extraction and distribution. It paints a picture of really ultimate human capability, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. This was not a local marketplace. This was a civilization built on highly valued, tangible goods. The cargo holds, they literally groaned with silver and tin, which were, essential building blocks for both industry and luxury in the ancient world.
And it required a specialized knowledge base.
A very specialized one. The mariners who captained the ships of Tarshish. I mean, they knew the deep, extended sea routes better than many Israelites knew their own local roads.
Wow.
And it's this combination of vast wealth and elite, long-distance expertise that makes Tarshish stand out. It becomes a prime example of human self-reliance.
And crucially, it seems to stand for the boundary itself, the edge of the map.
Yes.
When we turn to the most famous story connected with this place, the flight of the prophet Jonah, he chooses Tarshish specifically because it felt like the absolute outermost limit of the known world. It was like the last dock before, in the mind of an ancient traveler, the map just turned to empty space or legend.
And that concept of the boundary is absolutely key to understanding the narrative tension.
Yeah.
Jonah 1.3 confirms this. It was a deliberate act. He was seeking the maximum possible distance, both physically and spiritually.
Right.
For the Israelite mind, Tarshish was geographically the furthest point west you could imagine. So by paying his fare and choosing that route, Jonah was attempting to achieve the greatest possible separation from his assignment in Nineveh.
And not just the assignment.
No. Crucially, from the face of the Lord who gave him that assignment. This just reinforces the symbolic weight of Tarshish as the limit of the known world, and therefore, in Jonah's mind, the limit of potential obedience.
Okay, so let's start by grounding ourselves a bit more in that historical and cultural context. Where does Tarshish first even appear in the narrative of ancient peoples? What are its origins?
We start right at the foundation, in Genesis, in the Table of Nations. Tarshish is placed in the lineage of Javan in Genesis 10, and Javan himself is a son of Japheth.
And that lineage is significant.
It is, because Japheth's descendants are generally associated with the peoples of the coastlands and the isles. Those groups who naturally turn to the sea for trade, for sustenance, for expansion.
So right from the beginning, it's linked to the sea?
Immediately. This early marker links Tarshish to maritime activity and commerce. It sets its identity from the very start as a powerful sea-based people.
And given its pivotal role, I know historians have worked for centuries to try and identify the real-world location of this place. What's the scholarly consensus today? Where was Tarshish most likely?
The consensus among historians, archaeologists, and students of the text strongly identifies Tarshish with the ancient city-state of Tartessos.
Tartessos.
Yes. This region is located in the Iberian Peninsula, specifically situated along the southern river mouths of modern Spain, right near the Strait of Gibraltar.
And that's not just a guess.
Oh no, it's not random at all. This identification fits the biblical descriptions perfectly. It just creates a really coherent picture.
So how does that location, modern-day Spain, how does that square with the descriptions of the immense mineral wealth we always see linked to Tarshish in the Bible?
Well, it aligns beautifully with what we know about the ancient Mediterranean economy. The region of Tartessos was renowned in antiquity for its extraordinary mineral wealth.
Okay.
It was particularly known for vast deposits of silver, as well as lead and other industrial ores. So when Scripture speaks of Tarshish, it consistently links it to these raw metals, these resources that form the backbone of the ancient economy.
So the geology matches the text.
It's an incredibly strong match. This geological reality makes the Iberian site a very, very strong historical candidate. It proves Tarshish wasn't just some mythic place, but a physical source of significant global power.
So it wasn't just a pass-through or a trading hub, it was a primary source of industrial might. And the sources are so specific about the metals. Can you elaborate on the spectrum of resources it supplied and the level of craftsmanship that went with them?
Certainly, the economic details are fascinating because they cover both, basic industrial needs and high-end luxury.
Right.
Ezekiel 27, in describing Tyre's global trade network, it explicitly lists the metals Tarshish supplied: silver, iron, tin, and lead.
And tin was crucial?
Absolutely crucial in the ancient world for making bronze. And it was often sourced from these very distant points in the west, which made Tarshish's connection to it essential for everyone.
And yet, as you mentioned, the connection goes beyond just raw, dusty metal.
Exactly. Jeremiah 10 adds this layer of sophistication that tells us about the use of this wealth. It describes silver from Tarshish being beaten into plates, often joined with gold and dyed materials.
The most expensive ones.
The most expensive ones, specifically blue and purple. And this underscores that Tarshish was connected not only to the raw mining wealth, but also to the end stages of luxury craftsmanship. They provided the foundational materials, and their sophisticated trading partners, like the Phoenicians, they transformed them into items of religious and royal value.
That detail about the craftsmanship, it really suggests a vast, refined network. Now let's talk about that famous phrase, ships of Tarshish. Did that always refer strictly to vessels sailing to Spain, or did the phrase evolve into something more?
It evolved into a vital technical term in the ancient maritime world.
Okay.
While it certainly started by describing the actual vessels that sailed that incredibly long and dangerous route to Tartessos, ships of Tarshish grew into a shorthand for a type of vessel.
So it's more like a classification?
Yes, think of it as a quality or a capacity indicator. It's like us calling a large modern vessel a supertanker or, in the past, a clipper ship.
It signified size, sturdiness, seaworthiness.
Precisely. They were large, deep-draft, ocean-going vessels built specifically for long hauls and heavy cargo. They were capable of handling the extended sea routes required to reach the Western Mediterranean and even navigate the Atlantic trade.
And the prophets use it that way.
They do. Prophets like Isaiah use the term this way, emphasizing the vessel's advanced capability and its global reach, not just its specific destination. They were, in effect, the floating fortresses of commerce.
And this robust maritime culture would have naturally connected Tarshish to the dominant sea powers of the day. And that means the Phoenician network, based in Tyre.
That partnership was foundational to the entire Mediterranean economy. The relationship between Tarshish, the source of wealth, and Tyre, the trading and shipping hub, it was a symbiosis of supply and logistics.
And we see this formalized.
We do. It's formalized through the maritime alliance between King Solomon of Israel and Hiram of Tyre, which is detailed in 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles.
So what does that alliance tell us? What did each party, Israel, Tyre, and Tarshish, what did they each bring to the table?
Well, it reveals this critical, complementary relationship that spanned the entire known world. Israel, under Solomon, represented organizational prowess, administrative wisdom, and control over crucial land routes.
Okay.
And they partnered with the practical know-how of Tyre and Tarshish, which specialized in seaborne logistics, shipbuilding, and access to all those distant goods.
So Solomon from Jerusalem becomes a global player.
He effectively becomes a partner in a global supply chain. He's accessing resources and expertise he otherwise could never have managed. And this is what facilitated his tremendous architectural and governmental projects, most notably, of course, the temple.
And the cargoes from these joint ventures, they provide the most tangible evidence of just how far away Tarshish truly was. The planning must have been incredible.
They absolutely emphasize the logistics. The text highlights the multi-year cycles required for these voyages.
Yeah.
We read that the fleets would return once every 3 years.
3 years.
3 years. That interval underscores the immense, just staggering distance involved. It required incredible foresight for provisioning, for staffing, for navigating. And when the ships finally returned, they brought back this diverse and exotic range of cargoes.
Yeah.
Gold, silver, ivory, and apes and baboons.
Apes and baboons. I mean, that detail is so specific. For an Israelite living in Jerusalem, that cargo must have seemed almost mythical.
It speaks volumes about the extent of the journey. Gold and silver were valuable, yes, but ivory, apes and baboons, they represented the absolute pinnacle of exotic, non-native luxury.
Living proof.
They were living, breathing proof of a journey that transcended the familiar Mediterranean. It required advanced, long-term planning and sophisticated navigation that marks the Tarshish voyages as the absolute height of global long-distance trade at that time.
Okay, so with that foundation of Tarshish's geography and commercial power now established, we can look at how it functions within the larger biblical story. You know, the story of faith and obedience. Let's start where human ambition tries to harness that Western reach in the royal records. We see these accounts of Israel's kings trying to replicate Solomon's success, but, well, they often ended in immediate, surprising failure.
These repeated attempts and their results, they really serve as profound cautionary tales, both historically and theologically.
And the clearest example is King Jehoshaphat.
Yes, King Jehoshaphat.
Oh, yeah.
While he was generally considered a good and pious king, he attempted this massive state investment to build ships of Tarshish at Ezion-Geber on the Red Sea.
He was trying to copy Solomon's model.
He was trying to emulate the financial success, believing that if he just secured the right technology in the right location, he could tap into that vast mercantile wealth.
But the sources say the venture failed immediately. That feels like a key detail.
It's more than just a failure. It's an indictment of misplaced trust. 2 Chronicles records that the ships were wrecked or perhaps shattered right there in the port before they ever had a chance to set sail from Ezion-Geber.
So not out at sea.
Not out at sea. Imagine this scene. Years of investment, resources, labor, royal reputation, all poured into these magnificent, massive hulls, the height of technology, only for them to be utterly ruined.
Right there in the harbor.
Right there, maybe by a sudden localized storm or some structural flaw, but before they even started the long voyage, it was a humiliating and total loss of investment.
And this wasn't the only time Israel's naval ambitions faced, well, what seems like divine resistance.
No. We also see records of prior failed ventures, like those mentioned during his father's reign in 1 Kings. The attempts to master the sea, to force great economic success using the Tarshish model, were consistently thwarted.
That repeated failure, even among powerful, supposedly pious kings, that has to carry a significant theological lesson about human control versus divine sovereignty.
It absolutely carries a weighty message about dependence. These accounts stand as a stark reminder that even the most meticulously planned grand ventures backed by royal authority using advanced technology.
Ships of Tarshish.
Right, and situated in a strategically perfect location. None of that can guarantee success. Wise leaders and grand plans cannot force an outcome where the Lord has not granted his favor or his blessing.
And the failure is so immediate.
The immediate, localized failure serves to humble human ambition. It demonstrates that God controls not only the open sea, but also the immediate harbor.
So moving from royal ambition to prophetic warning, Tarshish also appears prominently in the judgments against prideful nations. The oracle against Tyre is a key example, isn't it? How economic interconnectedness ensures shared judgment.
Tyre was the absolute financial nerve center of the Phoenician Empire. Its vast commercial network spanned the entire Mediterranean.
And Tarshish was a main partner.
A primary trading partner. Ezekiel 27 lists Tarshish exchanging all those valuable metals, silver, tin, iron for tires, sophisticated merchandise. So Tarshish was established in the prophetic imagination as this powerful symbol, not just of wealth, but of Tyre's global reach and its market power.
And when the Lord judges Tyre, the economic shockwave travels all the way to the coast of Spain.
Precisely. The consequence is global and immediate. When the Lord brings down the pride and the arrogance of Tyre, the entire economic engine just grinds to a halt.
And the ships wail.
Isaiah 23 describes the ships of Tarshish wailing because their business dries up. They had sailed these long voyages, overcome every natural obstacle, only to be undone not by a storm, but by the collapse of their commercial infrastructure.
Wow.
This vividly shows that no market, no supply chain, no economy, no matter how vast or diversified, is too big or too distant to fail when the Lord executes judgment against human arrogance.
And the psalmist gives us an even more visceral, poetic image of God's sudden action against these symbols of human power.
Yes, Psalm 48 captures that divine force perfectly. It speaks of God shattering the ships of Tarshish with an east wind.
An east wind.
The imagery is highly significant. Considering that these ships were the absolute height of maritime engineering, strong hulls built specifically for heavy cargo and massive waves, their destruction by a mere wind, a localized weather event, it symbolizes the ease with which God, in a single moment, can completely undo the greatest works and symbols of human strength and pride.
He reduces the strongest hulls to splinters.
In an instant.
This leads us, I think, naturally to the most personal and famous appearance of Tarshish in Scripture, the story of Jonah. Focusing on the destination, why did the prophet choose the westernmost boundary of his known world? Was it just convenience?
Oh, far from it. Jonah 1.3 is explicit. He paid his fare to flee from the Lord.
From the Lord himself.
Yes. He chose Tarshish because it represented that geographic limit, the boundary line of his known map. It was the ultimate opposite of Nineveh, the city he was sent to, and it symbolized the maximum possible separation from God's personal mission for him. Tarshish was intended to be his sanctuary of resistance.
Now, many readers assume Jonah ran because he was afraid of the violent Assyrians in Nineveh. But the text reveals something much more profound and honestly theologically challenging about his true motivation.
This is the critical, profound twist in the story that defines the whole tension. Jonah was not running because he doubted God's power or his capacity to locate him.
Right.
As he later admits in Jonah chapter 4, he fled precisely because he knew God is gracious, compassionate, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, relenting from sending disaster.
So he was running not from fear of the Ninevites, but from the fear that God would be merciful to them.
Exactly. He feared the universal application of God's grace. He knew God's character was merciful, and if Nineveh repented, God, true to his nature, would spare the city. An outcome Jonah, because of his intense nationalism and resentment, absolutely dreaded.
Wow.
So Tarshish becomes a living metaphor in Jonah's mouth for a willful, theologically informed attempt to thwart the universal reach of God's merciful purpose. It was distance on purpose, a refusal to accept the scope of God's compassion.
Yet, the biblical narrative doesn't just end with judgment and flight. The prophetic books, especially Isaiah, they show this remarkable reversal. Tarshish transitions from a symbol of escape and resistance to one of future hope and mission.
And this transition is just a beautiful display of the totality of God's redemptive plan. In Isaiah's sweeping visions, Tarshish is brought fully into the fold of restoration.
How so?
Isaiah 66 lists Tarshish among the distant nations, along with Libyans and Lydians, that will witness the Lord's sign and hear his glory. The message is undeniable. Even the furthest, wealthiest coast, the destination of the reluctant prophet, will eventually recognize, declare, and participate in God's glory.
And the practical function of the ships of Tarshish is utterly transformed in this vision.
It is entirely repurposed and redeemed. Isaiah 60 shows the ships of Tarshish becoming the very first vessels to bring Israel's sons and daughters and their silver and gold from afar back to Zion.
So they're not carrying cargo for Tyre anymore.
No, they're no longer carrying foreign wealth to fuel Tyre's bride, nor are they carrying fleeing prophets. Instead, these massive, capable ships are pressed into the ultimate service of God's plan. They're assisting in the physical and spiritual restoration of Israel and contributing their wealth and maritime ability to the glory of the Lord in Jerusalem.
And finally, this vision of global submission, it gets woven into the royal hope of Israel, pointing forward to the ultimate king.
That ultimate hope is encapsulated beautifully in Psalm 72, which is a prayer for the king's reign. Verses 10 and 11 declare that the kings of Tarshish and of distant shores bring tribute to him. This elevates the geographical location into a definitive promise about the Messiah's universal rule.
So it's about more than just Solomon.
It points far beyond the temporal, localized reign of Solomon to the greater Son, whose dominion will not just be regional, but will draw honor and gifts and resources from every single horizon on earth, including the most distant sources of wealth.
So when we synthesize all these appearances of Tarshish, from a wealthy trading partner to a royal failure to Jonah's escape route and then to a future worshiper, what's the fundamental theological principle that emerges from all this?
Well, Tarshish stands as this perpetual biblical symbol for the absolute height of human capability. We're talking immense wealth, advanced technology, maximum maritime reach.
Right, the best we can do.
Exactly. But when that capability is set against the standard of the Lord's holiness, those strengths are exposed as fleeting, fragile, and temporary. Human ingenuity and resources, no matter how vast, they simply cannot purchase stability or avoid accountability.
So the wailing of the ships when Tyre falls and the sudden shattering of the strongest hulls in Psalm 48, it's all demonstrating that stability is a theological commodity, not an economic one.
Absolutely. The prophets used Tarshish and its ships to show that no economy, no level of technological advancement, and no accumulated wealth is secure against the hand of God. And this pattern, it prepares the heart of the believer to understand a core truth. True salvation and stability cannot be found in robust trade routes or strong markets or large fleets.
Where is it found?
It is found only in the Lord who speaks and acts decisively in history. That's the message of Psalm 46. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth.
And this leads us right back to the profound implication of Jonah's story, which is the universal presence and mercy of God. Jonah tried to limit God's mercy geographically by sailing west, but the whole episode just confirmed the opposite truth.
Jonah's flight serves as this magnificent, though I'm sure painful, object lesson. It confirms that God's presence fills the world, and that his mercy is not a private, restricted possession meant only for one people or one location.
He was rebelling against that idea.
He was. Jonah knew God's character, gracious and compassionate, and his flight was a rebellion against the universal application of that character. He was trying to outrun God's concern for the Gentiles.
And Tarshish, the literal edge of the known map, failed spectacularly as an escape route for him.
It failed because God's reach is absolute. The narrative powerfully underscores that no distance can sever us from God's purpose or his presence.
I mean, the details are just incredible.
They are. The fact that the Lord can arrest a technologically advanced ship in mid-sea with a sudden targeted storm,
Right.
that he can appoint a great fish to deliver a message, and then turn an entire violent city through a simple grudging message, it just proves that God's sovereignty is not bounded by geography or human will or national distinction.
His compassion is just as present in Nineveh as it is in Jerusalem.
It extends equally to the stubborn running prophet and the violent distant city.
Let's talk for a minute about the moral theology that's bound up with the wealth Tarshish represented, all the metals, the silver, the gold. Is the Bible warning against international trade and commerce itself, or is the warning directed at the trust we place in that commerce?
And that is the critical nuance we have to understand. The Bible is not anti-trade or anti-industry. Solomon's fleets, built through the Tarshish network, were used to enlarge the glory of God and secure resources for the temple.
So trade can be a good thing.
Trade, craftsmanship, resource extraction. They can all serve godly ends when they're conducted in obedience and with gratitude.
But Tarshish, in its capacity as the self-sufficient powerhouse, it symbolizes the deep temptation to believe that distance and dollars can provide ultimate security.
Yes. Tarshish, with its glittering metals and its vast international markets, it symbolizes the illusion that wealth or distance can shelter the heart from accountability.
And the prophets warn against that.
They warn fiercely that when wealth transitions from being a tool for service into the object of our ultimate trust, when the heart relies on its balance sheet or its international connections or its own logistical brilliance, judgment is inevitable.
So what's the core moral lesson?
The foundational lesson is this. The ultimate end goal of all riches in the kingdom vision is worship, not pride. The kings of those far coasts will ultimately honor the Son and submit their wealth under his righteous rule, just as Psalm 72 declares.
That focus on future rule connects directly to the relationship between Israel and the nations throughout history. How does Tarshish function within that future hope, specifically regarding the restoration promises?
Well, the Old Testament maintains a consistent distinction between national Israel and the Gentile nations, while at the same time it affirms that all nations are ultimately part of God's redemptive plan.
And Psalm 72 is an early signal of that.
It's an early, strong signal. Gentile honor will flow toward the Messiah's throne.
So how should we understand that fulfillment today, in our time?
Well, we live in the church age, where the gospel is spreading indiscriminately to all nations, fulfilling the universal mandate of the Great Commission. However, the specific physical and national promises made to Israel, promises of a restored land, a political establishment, and a king reigning from Jerusalem, They still await a future realization.
So the appearance of Tarshish in Isaiah 60 is more than just a general idea of global conversion.
It is a specific prophetic signal. The ships carrying Israel's sons and wealth back to Zion, and the kings of Tarshish bringing tribute. This indicates that in that future day, Gentile honor and resources and strength symbolized by the world's commercial boundary will be directed toward and definitively submitted to the Messiah's throne in Jerusalem.
It's a vision of the fullness of the Gentiles supporting the physical restoration of Israel.
It is a beautiful picture of it.
So this journey to the edge of the biblical map brings us back, as it should, to our own daily walk. If Tarshish is this test case for God's universal reach and sovereignty, what are the specific, practical, spiritual lessons we need to internalize about obedience, wealth, and mission?
I think the first lesson, drawn directly from the most famous narrative, is that running is wasted motion. It's all about obedience versus distance. We see the sheer futility of Jonah's escape. He moved fast. He paid his fare for the best, most distant route he could find.
He was all in.
All in. He aimed for the furthest horizon, and yet the storm met him so quickly. His entire investment in flight was utterly wasted.
That's a powerful application for us today, isn't it? In an age where physical distance is often replaced by digital or emotional flight, we try to hide our conscience in busyness or distraction.
Absolutely. The application is clear and immediate. When the Lord calls, obedience is the only wise answer. The heart that tries to hide its sense of spiritual accountability behind a crowded professional schedule or intense work or a flurry of activities or even a deliberate physical move, that heart will find that the Lord is present there too, calling them back to the path he has set. Psalm 139 is the ultimate assurance on this. There is no corner of the digital or physical world where we can successfully escape his spirit.
Okay, so that's the first lesson. What's the second?
The second lesson concerns the foundation of Tarshish's power, and that is, wealth is a tool, not a refuge. We have to learn to trust in God's covenant love. We recall that vivid, immediate failure of King Jehoshaphat's fleet broken right there in the harbor before the voyage even began.
Right.
That failure ships of the highest technological grade just shattering in port is a hard, visible reminder that our security rests not in the strength of our balance sheets, or the diversification of our portfolio, or our market margins, but entirely in the Lord's covenant love.
We have to recognize how fragile it all is.
We must. Human power, especially economic power that relies on logistical complexity, is inherently fragile.
And this applies directly to how we plan our lives, or our ministries, or our businesses. It's not just about avoiding failure, but understanding where success truly originates.
Precisely. If we, like Jehoshaphat, invest all our energy and resources into a grand plan based purely on human wisdom, even if it seems technologically perfect, a ship of Tarshish, we are setting ourselves up for failure if we neglect divine favor.
We need to hold our wealth with open hands.
That's the key. When God grants gain, our response must be gratitude and immediate, intentional generosity. And when gain is taken away, our response is to trust in God's wisdom, echoing that timeless truth of Job. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord.
The third lesson then seems to shift from personal stewardship to a global scope. Widen our prayers and hopes. A missionary focus. Tarshish, the symbol of the distant and dazzling, invites us to pray for the edges of the world.
Yes. The vision of the kings of Tarshish bringing tribute is a practical guide for our worship and our labor. It calls us to pray earnestly and specifically for distant peoples.
And not just the poor and needy.
No. Those who are geographically remote, culturally insulated, or even economically powerful enough to feel self-sufficient, we must pray for them to honor Christ. We are tasked to labor intentionally so that the gospel reaches the very ends of the earth.
We should draw deep courage from that prophetic vision of the ships being repurposed, shouldn't we?
Immense courage. Isaiah 60, describing those massive ships carrying the people and the wealth back to Zion. It assures us that God is sovereign enough to bend even global trade, advanced travel, and national prosperity toward the culmination of his eternal kingdom purposes.
So our efforts matter.
Every effort made to share the gospel in the Tarshishes of our modern world, whether that's a distant financial capital or a remote, resource-rich nation, is a meaningful participation in that certain future promise.
The fourth lesson you have here addresses a necessary tension we often encounter in biblical studies. That's the desire for certainty versus the reality of divine mystery. Peace with mystery, focusing on clarity.
Right. Tarshish teaches us humility in our pursuit of knowledge. The fact that the Bible provides such rich detail connecting it to metals, wealth, and long voyages leading most scholars to identify it as Tartessos in the Iberian West, yet does not give us an explicit, definitive GPS coordinate, is instructive.
It is.
We can hold a well-supported geographical view without binding our faith to the mastering of ancient maps.
So, what matters most isn't the precise location on a map, but the crystal clear theological message tied to the name.
That is the core takeaway. The clear central message is this: God judges human pride, God's presence reaches the distant, and God's plan gathers the nations.
I see.
The primary task of the disciple is not to master every non-essential detail on the ancient charts, but to heed the living Lord who rules the seas and sends his reliable word. Clarity must always outweigh our curiosity about non-essential speculative details.
And finally, Tarshish strengthens our hope. It lifts our eyes past the struggles of the present age toward the certainty of the future kingdom.
In our modern world, where instability is constant and human institutions so frequently fail to deliver on their promises, the prophetic vision of tribute from Tarshish is a theological anchor.
An anchor.
Yes. The prophets force us to lift our eyes past the current state of delay and struggle to a future where far coasts rejoice in the light of the Lord. It assures us that Christ's kingdom will stand, and the furthest shores, the most independent, the wealthiest, the most resistant, will eventually own his name. The mercy shown to Nineveh is the beginning of the mercy that will ultimately reach to the absolute ends of the earth.
What a profound and beautiful arc, from a distant, wealthy port chosen as the ultimate location for escape, to a vital component of future global worship. Tarshish, sitting at the edge of the world, truly becomes the ultimate field where God displays both his judgment, breaking the proudest ships with a simple east wind, and his profound universal mercy.
And his mercy, sending a reluctant prophet to convert a violent, far-off city.
It forces us to synthesize those two great realities in our own lives, doesn't it?
It does. For us as believers today, the story of Tarshish is a clear call to action. Refuse the impulse to flee from God's difficult calling, hold the wealth and resources we have with open, grateful hands, and look forward with certainty to a future where the nations, both near and far, rich and poor, will bring their very best resources to honor Christ.
The Lord who rules the seas is the Lord who writes history. And we can be absolutely sure that he has not forgotten his magnificent promises to his people or to the nations.
And so we end this deep dive where the hope of the kings culminated. It's a powerful and certain declaration of Christ's guaranteed kingdom. Let this be your focus as you go about your day. May the kings of Tarshish and of distant shores bring tribute to him. May the kings of Sheba and Seba present him gifts.
Psalm 72.
That verse is such a strong encouragement for all of us laboring today. The furthest shores will eventually own his name. May your work, your planning, and your prayers today reflect that unshakable hope as you live in the knowledge that the Lord who commands the harbor is the Lord who guides your path. Trust the one who rules the seas, and may his peace be upon you until the day the distant coasts rejoice in his light.